late in the evening. We're coming around the first curve, and the first curve will be near a graveyard, actually. And as we come around the curve, we slowed down, and the headlights hit something in the road. What they hit was a form. And for a split second, I thought, oh, it's a large bird in the middle of the road. It kind of stands up a little bit. With just one movement, it shot straight up.
Hello, everybody. This is Geoff Arbuckle. I want to welcome you to another edition of Film Seizure Streams the Movies. And for this edition, I am going to be talking about The Mothman Legacy, which is coming out, it comes out today as I'm releasing this which is October 20th. And it's a really neat little story here that I have to tell about this movie. But first, let me give some quick little housekeeping bits. New episodes of Film Seizure can be found at www.filmseizure.com every single Wednesday. Then you can come check out new episodes of Monster Mondays, which is where I talk about a monster movie. That is every Monday at filmseizure.com as well. You can find our podcast on several different places. We upload to places like SoundCloud, which then sends it over to places like Spotify and Stitcher and Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We are also over at TuneIn. We release our recordings also on YouTube, and we just recently can now be found in Amazon. If you go to Amazon.com and go into their music area, you will find their podcast there. It's done by Amazon and Audible, so you can find us there now too. So let's talk about The Mothman. First and foremost, this was written and directed by Seth Breedlove. Now, I had watched Mr. Breedlove's film last year, Momo, the Missouri Monster. That and this one both were narrated by Lyle Blackburn, who is a pretty well-known a researcher of cryptids, particularly American kind of folklore creatures. So I had, knowing that this was their next project and this was their next film, I definitely wanted to check this out because if you listen to my review last year for Momo, the Missouri Monster, I really, really liked that documentary. It's a very interesting and fascinating way that they handled that legend, because there's two sides of it, right? There's the more salacious side of, maybe there's a monster that's very similar to Bigfoot or the Fouke monster from Arkansas or whatever. That's kind of the sexy part of that story, right? Like that there could be some sort of creature out there that haunts people and that people see and that does things that scares them or whatever. Then there's the other side of the story, which is the reality of it and how that affects the small town in which the creature shows up in, and the area that it shows up in, and you really got this really interesting dichotomy in that of the people who told the stories and what their accounts were, and maybe some of what their kind of mentality or their living situation was, versus the people of the town that had to deal with the sudden influx of the people being interested in this story and wanting to see it for themselves, and the out of towners that would come into this small community and kind of maybe wreak a little bit of havoc there. And I really liked how they handled that, because they want to talk about the monster, but they also want to be realistic about it. And I'll get into a little bit more of what I mean about that here in a bit. But so I was really interested in how they might handle something like the Mothman. And Mothman is, let's face it, man, it's one of the superstars of the North American cryptids, right? Mothman is right up there with Bigfoot, the Yeti. It's up there with Nessie. It's a pretty popular story, and it's a pretty popular creature. You don't get very far into the Silver Bridge catastrophe that happened in 1967 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, before you start going down the road of hearing about this Mothman creature. So it's a big deal, and it's one of the more popular ones, and I think a lot of that helped with the Richard Gere movie that came out based on the Mothman Prophecies book. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute too. But so this is a movie that is dealing with one of the big time creatures. And it's one that, here I am in central Indiana, and I'm well aware of what the Mothman is and have been for most of my life. So, this is no underdog story here. But the way that Breedlove approaches this is, I think, very, very emotional and personal. And I think it has the right amount of every possible thing that you want this story to do. First and foremost, it talks about the history of this little town, Point Pleasant, that really was just kind of like any other small middle Atlantic Appalachian town that suddenly had this terrible thing that happened in 1967 in which a bridge collapsed and several people, I think dozens of people, ended up losing their lives because they were in the cars on the bridge when the bridge collapsed and they fell into the water and got trapped and died. And it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. But then there's this after effect, right? It's the after effect of a town that needs to cope with that tragedy, right? So it talks a little bit about that. It talks, of course, about the sightings and the popularity of Mothman and whether or not Mothman is actually a harbinger or if it's the sympathetic creature. Did it cause the catastrophe to happen? What did people see? How does it differ compared on the sightings from one person to the next? And what that story might have come from based on the kind of melting pot of the cultures that make up West Virginia, and particularly this area of West Virginia, and what could potentially be a real world explanation for if there is some sort of mutated creature or something like that. Well, how could it be that way? So it comes at this as a much more of it's got that salaciousness of the campfire story where everybody wants to sit around. They want to hear a spooky story. They want to feel like monsters are real. And because I think if we want to hear the stories about monsters, we handle the real world monstrosities and the real world tragedies in a slightly different way. But we want to be scared by that. We want to hear the ghost stories, even if we don't believe in ghosts. There's something about that story, about hearing the unexplained. Even if we don't believe in various monsters like Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster or the Mothman, we want to hear the stories. We want to hear these people basically telling their story. And the reason why I really like that is that, and it really kind of shows in how Breedlove kind of goes about his interviews and his writing of this story, and I think it also goes into how Lyle Blackburn narrates this as well, is that none of these people are treated like cranks, and none of these people are people trying to cash in on what they think they saw. I truly believe that these people believe they saw what they saw, and they believe what they see is tied to a greater story, a greater story based on our roots and stuff like that. And I think that that's really, really important, because I am not necessarily somebody who is going to immediately discount when somebody says that they think they saw a UFO, or that they feel like that they were, or that they have memories of being abducted. I will probably do a little side eye on something where they think that these, that the UFO, that the aliens are controlling government, or the monsters are, are making people do certain things so that the monsters will get something out of it. I might turn a little bit of a side eye at that. However, when somebody says, I was driving along the road and I saw these lights, it's real easy to believe that you see things. The fun of the story is the imagination part of it, right? Like, what does the person hearing the story think they might have saw or might have seen, and what do we put our own imagery around it? And it was mentioned in this documentary, the idea of it's a little bit like an ink block test, right? Like a Rorschach test. You see something and your brain is flipping through, almost like it's flipping through its own files, trying to figure out what it is that you're seeing. And in all of those kind of neurons that are firing off, and what you see connects it to possibly a bigger story. But that does not derail any conversation around what these people think they saw and how it connects to this greater story of Mothman. And I think that is incredibly fascinating about this. And this is something that I liked about Momo, and I really like about Mothman Legacy, is that Seth Breedlove is very good at connecting the fact that this is American folklore. He's not out to say that these creatures are real. What he's out to say is that the stories are real. And whether or not, there is a certain amount of faith and a certain amount of what you want to believe. And if it's what you want to believe, then that's okay. This documentary isn't there to say what you believe isn't real. It's also not there to say, if you don't believe, you're going to have to believe to be able to enjoy this. No, there's a very excellent dividing line in how these movies are made, where it's the American folklore, it's the stories that we pass down from one generation to the next. It's that collective consciousness that we have around various stories. Every major civilization has lycanthropy, vampirism, ghosts, harbingers of doom or death. We all have this, and it's all been passed down and it's kind of bred into us, right? It's it is part of our collective existence of being human beings. Where it comes from, how it manifests, is just as interesting and as fun to look at as the creature itself, or the thing that it's, it's like, we can hear all of the stories and we can read all of the history books about how the Eastern Europeans came up with the idea of how vampires came into existence, what they do to protect against it, what it means when they think they see one, what do they, what are the different types, all of that stuff. But none of that is meant to make us believe that these things are real. And if you want to believe that Mothman is a real thing, or if you have been somebody who has seen that, I don't doubt you. This movie is not doubting you. But what it's also very keen to do is to say that the folklore is very valid. And that's what makes these movies that Seth Breedlove has done very, very fascinating to me. Because I'm not somebody who watches ghost hunting shows, particularly in the month of October, as it is when I'm recording this. I'm not watching those shows during the month of October to be made a believer or to back up my belief of ghosts or monsters or demons or whatever. I watch it because I want to. It's kind of like I said, sitting around that campfire. I want to be a little spooked. I want to think about these things. I want to be placed in spooky situations or whatever the case may be. When it comes to cryptids and stuff like that, I'm not so much. It's the reason why I don't watch like the Bigfoot hunter shows, is because they're actually out there trying to find it. What I'm most interested in is exactly what Seth Breedlove is very good at doing in these movies of his, which is to talk about the folklore of it, to talk about the inbred, in all of us, that fear that we have, that flight, that fight or flight kind of feeling that we get when we get scared, and our brains flipping through the Rolodex of things in our imagination to piece together what we think we saw and what we think it means. And, and all of the historical element of the West Virginian history that they go into in what I would call the first act of this, which is that Native American groups never really liked the area that became West Virginia, that they felt like several patches of that was cursed. They really only ever used it for hunting. Then on top of that, they were fearful of the English encroaching, so they sided with the French, but then eventually the French abandoned them, and they would eventually kind of be pushed out of their land. So you have this mixture of those Native American stories and legends and things that were in the area mixed in with the Scotch-Irish type of stuff that would come from mostly heavily Celtic backgrounds. And so a lot of that is, talking about how these kind of the legacy of these stories and how they melded together and how they started getting passed around and everything is, really kind of feeds what people in the area will begin to see and think about when they see red glowing eyes and a winged creature. And, they tie it back to potential Native American, concepts that may even be older than that, and they tie it back to things like banshees and all of that stuff. And all of that stuff to me is terribly, terribly fascinating. And it's the exact type of thing that I want to see when I'm watching something about cryptids, monsters, this kind of folklore idea. I don't want anybody to try to convince me that any of this stuff is real. I want to come up with that myself. And what I usually land on is that, well, yeah, this stuff is real because the folklore exists. I don't have to be presented with a physical piece of Mothman or a physical piece of Bigfoot or whatever. That's not as important as the concept of the folklore element of it. And that's, I think, something that Breedlove does an exceptional job with these documentaries. So I would definitely recommend checking this out if it comes across any of the streaming platforms. It's definitely worth the 76 minutes or so that this documentary is. You learn a little bit about West Virginia. You get to see some of the people who remember some of the initial mid-60s fright of all of the sightings and stuff, and of course the Silver Bridge incident. The people who were there to kind of either just talk to people and interview them and hear what they have to say, and then like the people, the Walmsleys who run the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. You get to hear all of these different perspectives, and you get to hear about John Keel, who wrote the Mothman prophecies. And you hear his own, where he was kind of flavoring the story that ends up taking on a life of its own too, and how it becomes part of the folklore, even though it's manufactured. It's very, very fascinating sociology type of stuff that we that we see in this, and it's just those really folksy folklore type of stories that really, really shine in this movie. So, you know, I would definitely check it out. Of course, you can go to smalltownmonsters.com. All of the past movies are there too, but you can definitely get a copy or find out more about the Mothman prophecy or the Mothman Legacy there. And if you have any more interest in that, you can also I would also recommend Googling Lyle Blackburn, Lyle, and then Blackburn, Blackburn. He's got several books, and you know you can also get to some of the Small Town Monsters productions through him too. So I would definitely check those guys out there. Both they do excellent historical folklore sociology type of stuff with their various writings and their various movies and so forth. I would definitely recommend checking that out. This was exactly what I wanted on an October evening, which was something that's a little bit spooky, but also just interesting, you know, for the 76 minutes I was engaged and I was really into it. And I admit there were times where I got a little bit of goosebumps because some of the stories and some of the tellings and some of the reenactments were effective, and it's exactly what I wanted. And it definitely feeds that interest that I have in cryptids and various other, like those North American monsters and stuff like that. So, and legends and so forth. So definitely check it out. Again, smalltownmonsters.com. You can also check out the other movies that they've done. I also recommend Momo because on a different angle, whereas Point Pleasant embraces Mothman, the area in which the Missouri Monster was sighted and stuff, they try to distance themselves from it. And it's a very interesting dichotomy in that movie, and the history and the folklore and the way that people treat the Mothman as a symbol of potentially even something that could be a harbinger, or something that is something that needs sympathy, or something that might even be something that is extra dimensional. All of that stuff is so fascinating in this, and I definitely recommend it. So I'm gonna close out this review with that. I definitely recommend this. It's a good watch. It's a fun hour and 15 minutes. It's also fascinating just to hear people's stories and again, realizing that they 100% believe what they saw, and you have no reason to combat that, because the human mind works in very interesting ways, just like the planet Earth works in very peculiar and interesting ways and times too. So if you believe in it, there's enough here for you. If you are skeptical but you're interested in the folklore part, there's definitely something here for you as well. Again, every Wednesday, new episodes of Film Seizure. You can go to www.filmseizure.com. Those episodes are hosted by myself, Jason Oliver, and Chuck Moore. Mondays, you can go to the same site, filmseizure.com. Check out Monster Mondays. And you can find us just about everywhere. I would just go to filmseizure.com as our hub. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Film Seizure. But until then, don't forget to save me a spot at the end of the couch.